Kentucky Spin. Our four core values: respect, education, dignity, empowerment.
Well, good morning, and thank you for taking time out of your day to join us on our Transition Tuesday Key to Work. We are so glad that you are with us today. My name is Amber Ham. I'm the Training and Outreach Coordinator for Kentucky Spin. And once again, we welcome you. Before we get started this morning, there are a few housekeeping things that we would like to go over before I pass things to our guest speaker. On your Zoom dashboard, you should see a Q&A box and a chat box that you have graciously already utilized, and we appreciate that. You can enter questions or comments in either, and we will have time set aside to address those as they come in. We also offer real-time captions that are available here in this Zoom session. Click on the closed caption button and select show subtitles to view the captions. There will be links that are put into the chat box today for the presentation and any handouts that we discussed. If you're unable to get those links during the presentation, there will be an email following the webinar where we will make sure those links get to you in your email. A little bit about Kentucky Spin, or Kentucky Special Parent Involvement Network. We are a statewide 501c3 nonprofit organization that is funded by the U.S. Department of Education under IDEA since 1988, when Kentucky first received a PTI. Kentucky Spin Parent Center provides training, information, and support for children and youth with all types of disabilities, birth through 26 years old and beyond, their parents, families, as well as professionals. And the mission of Kentucky Spin is to link families and individuals with disabilities to valuable resources that will enable them to live productive, fulfilling lives. It's easier to tell you what we do not do at Kentucky Spin instead of telling you what we do. We do not act as attorneys. We do not provide legal advice, and we do not represent families. However, we empower individuals to effectively advocate for themselves as well as their families. And we provide that peer-to-peer model of support to help access needed information and resources. And at this time, I would like to introduce our guest speaker for today, Beth, if you'd like to tell everyone a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. My name is Beth Metzger. I'm a program coordinator with Kentucky Protection and Advocacy, the state's federally mandated system that was created to protect and promote the disability rights of folks within the Commonwealth. I am very fortunate to have been here at PNA for almost 23 years and have been in charge of our voting grants for almost 2. Our agency is centrally located in Frankfort, but we cover all 120 counties of the Commonwealth. And every disability, every age, and people can contact us whenever they have any questions, even if they feel like they don't feel like their rights have been violated, and just to get some information. And all of our services are free, regardless of income. And I think that's it.
If you'd like to go ahead and share your presentation, I'm gonna pass things on to you.
Great, thank you. Okay, are we on there?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, awesome. So one of the things I love doing with my job is going around and training folks about what their rights are, and rights that are protected not only by federal law but also state law. And I will tell you that Kentucky P&A, protection and advocacy, is considered a law practice. However, I am not an attorney. I like to say don't want to be one, won't haven't even played one on TV. It's okay, but I am supervised by an attorney. So every bit of guidance that my agency provides is legally based. The reason why I wanted to call this the key to work is, those of us in the disability field do use a lot of acronyms. And so, of course, KEY is an acronym. Oops. Okay, so, and KEY stands for Knowledge Empowers You. And because when you think about it, the more knowledgeable you are about a situation or a topic, the stronger you really are, and especially in your own self-advocacy and advocating for other individuals. So, question: how many United States laws are about work? Anybody want to speak up and throw out a guess?
I'm going to say 20.
20. Okay.
We also have a 20 in the chat box.
Okay. Actually, there's 187. And interestingly enough, the U.S. Department of Labor enforces 180 of those, which means that those are like the overall generic type of employment laws. And whereas the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission enforces the remaining 7, which means that these that there are specific rights for what attorneys and legislators like to call protected classes, and folks with disabilities are considered a protected class. Okay, and don't worry, we're not going to talk about all 187 because honestly, if I had to do that, it would put you to sleep. It would put me to sleep, and that just simply would not be a good look for us. So instead, we're going to hit some of the main ones. Okay. The Rehabilitation Act, that's actually one of the one of the oldest laws that we're going to talk about today. And the Rehab Act, which was passed in the 70s, prohibits discrimination against people with disabilities by agencies and programs that receive federal money. That's real easy to understand, isn't it? So in other words, disabilities and agencies that receive money from the federal government cannot treat people differently or badly because they have disabilities, in a nutshell. And the Rehab Act also created programs and agencies to help people with disabilities to work. Like, I'm sure everybody's heard of vocational rehabilitation. The Centers for Independent Living. We have 2 here in Kentucky. We have the Center for Accessible Living, and then we have Independence Place. And then the final 2 programs are programs from my agency. One is protection and advocacy for individual rights, which allows my agency to assist and maybe even provide representation to people with disabilities who, and when the disabilities are not developmental or intellectual, a mental illness, or a traumatic brain injury. And then the client assistance program. The client assistance program gets involved whenever someone with a disability has any issues whatsoever in accessing services through Voc Rehab. I will tell you that prior to September 11th of 2021, the client assistance program used to be housed, well, what was housed within Voc Rehab. Which made it a little difficult for the client assistance program to be able to do what they're supposed to do. But Governor Beshear redesignated the client assistance program over to Kentucky Protection and Advocacy, and it became final in September of 2021. And I became the client assistance program coordinator in March of 2022. Okay, so everybody, just about everybody's heard about the Americans with Disabilities Act. That you know, folks don't realize that the Americans with Disabilities Act actually expanded upon the Rehab Act. And it provided more detail about not discriminating against people with disabilities. And it expanded the prohibition to include state and local government and private businesses. So in other words, state and local government and like your local Walmart or wherever, they have to follow the ADA. And not only when it comes to employment, but also other means of accessibility too. And Title I of the law requires employers to provide something called reasonable accommodations to their workers with disabilities. And reasonable accommodations are things that help people do their jobs. For example, I worked with a lady who was who's been blind since birth, and she works in a warehouse where they send out items that people have purchased and so forth. And her job is to package those items up and put the address label on it and everything and send it out. Well, the way that she can do that as someone who has no vision is that she has a screen reader. And I'm sure you've seen the little guns at or scanner guns at Walmart and Kroger and other stores where you scan the barcode and it tells you it tells the cash register what it is and how much it is. And it's the same thing with the lady I worked with, except that it would tell her not only what it was, but what size package she needed to utilize. And so by having that, she is able to work on her own, and which made her very, very happy. Okay, so the Fair Labor Standards Act was passed in 1938, and it's the oldest law we're going to talk about here. And it's really important for us to talk about this because of a few things. This law made rules saying that the employers must follow about working hours and pay. It established something called a minimum wage, and a minimum wage is the lowest amount per hour a person can earn. And the states do, but the federal law says states get to decide. So in Kentucky, our minimum wage is one thing, but if you cross the borders into either Tennessee, Ohio, Indiana, Virginia, West Virginia, their minimum wage will be different. Okay, another thing is that it allows employers with special certificates to pay their workers with disabilities less than minimum wage for their work. This pay rate is called sub-minimum wage. Now, that part of the law doesn't seem quite fair, does it? Like a lot of laws, the wording, what's in there was put out of good intentions. Because in 1938, there were all of these veterans from World War I who wanted to go out and work, but because of their disabilities, employers didn't want to hire them. So Congress said, okay, well, we will give you something called an incentive. If you hire these workers and give them something to do, you don't have to pay them as much as you pay everybody else, because everybody knows that people with disabilities are not able to provide to do the same amount of work and same type of work as people who were considered as able-bodied. And that's all well and good. However, there are places still in the United States. Kentucky has 20 places that pay people less than minimum wage for their work, and it doesn't seem quite right, because it's, as an advocate, it kind of makes it gives me kind of a queasy feeling, because people with disabilities are not worth less than people who don't have disabilities, and so therefore their work is not less than everybody else's, and so they should be paid accordingly. Okay, and just so you know, as it seems that as the time becomes more modern, the names of laws get longer. Not quite sure why, but next is the Ticket to Work and Work Incentives Improvement Act, and it allows people who get supplemental security income or Social Security disability checks to try to go to work without them losing their checks right away. It created Work Incentives Planning and Assistance, or WIPA, programs to help people learn how much they can work before their check amounts go down. And it also created a program for my office, the Protection and Advocacy for Beneficiaries of Social Security, to help people who experience problems with their employers while trying to go to work. That's the other program, and I am over. And earlier when I was talking about the lady who's blind, who uses the screen reader, I had to I represented her against her employer because her employer took away the screen reader that worked for her to use for one that they created. But the problem is that the one that they created did not speak in the same language that my client did. And so because it's not the same language, it's not them, even though they provided a screen reader, it's not considered a reasonable accommodation because it didn't meet her needs. Okay, and then finally, this is the final law. the Workforce Innovation and Opportunities Act of 2014. It created the Pre-Employment Transition Program to help students get ready for work after they graduate. And it points out that people with disabilities have the right to competitive and integrated employment. What this means is that people with a disability have the right to work alongside both people with and without disabilities, not just their supervisor, while earning at least minimum wage. That's really, really important. And something else that a lot of teachers don't realize, because it's not out there, it says that sheltered workshops, which are the places that pay sub-minimum wage, can't pay sub-minimum wages to people under the age of 24. And what that means is if someone goes into a sheltered workshop right after high school at age 18, 19, they have to be paid minimum wage. But at age 24, their rate of pay can go down to whatever sub-minimum wage number that is. And it's usually around $2 an hour. In some places, I don't know if it's here in Kentucky, I don't think so, but in other places, it's like 25 to 50 cents an hour. So again, it goes back to my agency's stance on how unfair sub-minimum wage is. Okay, so this hopefully the little quick hit law lesson wasn't painful to anybody. And this, we're going to put our key, which is our knowledge that we just learned, to the test. What I'm going to do is I'm going to ask, tell you a situation and ask a question, and then there will be two possible answers. If y'all could let me know what you think your answer is, and then I'll let you know what the correct answer is and why. So are we ready for this? Okay. All righty. Sorry, I moved my mouse in the wrong way and I didn't. There we go. Okay, so Isabel, Kelly, did you have something to say?
Yes, I'm sorry. I didn't know if you were going to break later for questions, but there is a question that is being asked. What is a sheltered workshop?
Okay, great. I should have explained that. A sheltered workshop is a program that has people with disabilities doing contract work where they get paid, and the people with disabilities get paid less than minimum wage. The only workers in the sheltered workshops are people with disabilities. It's normally people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And they have contracts usually through great big companies putting together like putting like nuts onto bolts or screws. Sometimes it's sorting things. And what happens is the company pays the workshop a certain amount of money for whatever that the people are doing, and then out of that, the workshop pays their workers. So I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Beth. I will let you know if there is further clarification needed.
Okay, great, thanks. I apologize for not explaining what a sheltered workshop was before. Okay, so first situation. Isabel will graduate from high school soon. Her teacher said that Isabel shouldn't waste her time trying to find a job. No one would hire her because of her disability. Is Isabel out of luck? Yes or no?
No.
Right. Absolutely not. So anyone with a disability who wants to work has the right to try. Isabel should already have a special plan for life after high school. If she doesn't have one, or if Voc Rehab was not involved in the meeting, Isabel should call me. My office can help her get connected with Voc Rehab for evaluation and or some other provider, because it could be Voc Rehab or another provider. So, because just remember, anybody with a disability who wants to work have the right to try. Sometimes people who have a legal guardian, they will want to work, and their guardian will say, no, we don't want you to work. And I can talk to the guardian about that, because a lot of times there's a lot of fear about people going to work, and a lot of misinformation out there. Okay. Alrighty, so Hiram, and I will tell you, all of the names in here are Old Testament names. I gave everybody Old Testament names because it makes me smile, and because they're a little bit unusual. Hiram heard an advocate say that everyone has the right to earn at least minimum wage. What does this mean? The highest rate of pay or the lowest rate of pay that a state allows? Okay, I'm seeing lowest in the chat, which is correct. So, like I said earlier, every state has a law that tells employers the lowest amount of money that they can pay their employees per hour. And in Kentucky, that is $7.25. In other places, in other states, it's up to $14, $15 an hour. And again, there are the sheltered workshops do have special permission from the U.S. government to pay their workers less than $7.25 an hour. Some of the workshops do pay minimum wage, while others don't. Okay, so Mabel needs to take classes to learn how to be a hairstylist. She doesn't have any money to pay for the classes. Is she out of luck? Yes or no? She can't. Oh, yep. Yeah, she doesn't have any money to pay for her cosmetology classes. Okay, and y'all are right. The answer is no. Whoops. Yeah, she has options on what she can do. Mabel can talk with Voc Rehab about going to a place called the Carl D. Perkins Center, which is out in Thelma, Kentucky, for those of y'all who are unaware. And Thelma is in Johnson County, I do believe. And Mabel could actually live there and take her classes for free. And the cool thing about the Perkins Center is that everybody's program is at their own pace. So if Mabel needs some extra time to do some things for her certificate, she can take that time. Another thing that Mabel could do is research cosmetology schools in her home area. Mabel can ask if they offer financial aid or help to pay for school. Something else too, I'm sorry, I should say, is that when it comes to voc rehab, Mabel doesn't have to go to the Carl Perkins Center if she doesn't want to. If there is like a local community college or cosmetology school that is close to her, she and if she's a voc rehab consumer, she can talk to them about paying for those classes. Okay, so Aloysius, his friends call him Al, wants to get a job. A friend says that as soon as Al starts to work, he'll lose his SSI check. Is his friend right? Yes or no? Right. Right. The answer is no. Because like I was talking about the ticket to work and work incentives. Social Security has a program called Ticket to Work that lets people who get checks try to work. If the people earn a certain amount of money in a specific period of time, their check amounts will go down. If they keep on working and earn a lot of money, they will no longer get benefits checks. And you know, they really wouldn't need to have them. Al needs to talk with the counselor at the Work Incentives Planning and Assistance Program, and then that person will help him with a special plan called a benefits analysis. And WIPA is the program itself is not a place. It's kind of like special education. Special education is not a place, it's a service. So, and I have a map here that shows the WIPA programs in Kentucky. So we have Louisville on westward. The Center for Accessible Living does that. And then east of Louisville is Goodwill Industries. And some people have said to me, well, you know, I don't want to work in a Goodwill store, so I can't use them for benefits analysis. And those programs those are two separate programs. You don't have to work in a Goodwill store to get work incentives planning and assistance services through Goodwill. They have a grant through the Social Security Administration, both Goodwill and the Center for Accessible Living, to do these to provide these services to folks. Okay.
Beth, there was a question in
Sure.
the chat.
Okay.
It said, what other types of training and educational programs will voc rehab support?
Okay. Voc Rehab will support lots of different training programs and certification and education. And the thing is that, and because I could sit here all day and I can name off those, but really what it comes down to is what the individual wants to do, what their vocational goal is. And it may be that the person doesn't necessarily have to go and get a 4-year degree, that they can go through a certification program in order to do a job. Other times, other jobs don't require someone to get extra education and training other than on the job. And I see Kelly that you put some links in the chat. Thank you so much for that. And because like the IEP, the Individualized Education Program for students in special education. And there for Voc Rehab, there is an IPE, which is an individualized plan for employment. And in both of those cases, the I is individualized. So, and Kelly wrote, I've known of people that have received apprenticeships and have even become self-employed. Yes, that is an option too. And also when people think about work, they unfortunately will think about the jobs that they can see, not the jobs that are behind the scenes. And because really what you do for not necessarily a job, but a career, whatever your calling is to do, is based solely on the limits of your imagination. And it's really interesting. I have regular contact with Voc Rehab administrators, and they're within the past year, they have seen a rather sizable uptick in number of Voc Rehab consumers who are pursuing opening their own businesses, which is amazing. Okay.
So a follow-up to that
Sure.
is, so it can range from a certification program up to a 4-year degree in Voc Rehab support. And then this person goes on to say that their son with high functioning autism has been using Voc Rehab for more than 3 years, and these options have never been discussed.
Okay. So in that situation, what I would encourage the person to do is to contact my office, and so that we can see what can be worked on. And again, it's going to depend on the vocational goal, as well as, there are some additional evaluations that are done, because, and I'm not saying that this is this person's experience, but if a person has a diagnosis that would doesn't support them going through a traditional 4-year program, that doesn't mean that the Voc Rehab services go away. It's just that the counselor and the individual need to work together to figure out the best route to go to get that help that person reach their vocational goal. Does that
Thanks
help?
so much, Beth.
Okay, so Felix sorts mail and packages in a company's mailroom. He has to leave work early on some days to go to doctor's appointments. He's afraid he's going to lose his job because of this. Is there anything he can do? Yes or no? Right. The answer is yes. Because remember, we had talked about reasonable accommodations that are provided for under Title I. He should talk to his boss about getting a reasonable accommodation. For example, he can ask for an alternate work schedule, like to be able to make up his time he lost when he goes to the doctor. Felix and his doctor will have to fill out some paperwork to ask for the accommodation. There will be a meeting to talk about his request, and Felix's boss in human resources, those are the people who handle the accommodations. They're the ones who write people's checks and so forth. aren't allowed to tell anyone else about his accommodation and why he needs to have it. Now, here's an interesting thing. The Americans with Disabilities Act does not require people to do their request for accommodations in writing. My office says to always do it in writing, because, you know, that way everybody's on the same page. And two, you know, it's kind of like when with an IEP, you sit down and have a meeting to discuss what services someone is going to have. But you don't discuss what services someone is going to have just as the person and the teacher are walking down the hallway. That there needs to be a formalized way of getting things. And, you know, I talk to a lot of folks who will say, I have X diagnosis, but I don't know what kind of services or what kind of accommodations I can ask for. And there is a really great website for the Job Accommodations Network. It is the website is askjan, it's all one word, .org. And it's very easy to navigate. And not only will they have suggested accommodations according to diagnosis, but also according to job duty. And the big thing here is because we talked about my person whose employer took away the accommodation of a screen reader that worked well for her and gave her one that didn't work for her, and how that wasn't reasonable. We also have to take a look at what's reasonable on the other side. For example, I had a guy who had an autoimmune issue, and he would have to test his blood several times during the day. Well, his employer said, okay, well, what we're going to do is on your floor, we will create a largest stall just for you, that where you can keep your supplies and your sharps containers and everything, and it will be locked, and only you and housekeeping will have a key to get in. So that way no one is bothering his stuff. Well, and that offer is really, really great, right? Well, the guy didn't like that. He didn't think that was reasonable, because what he wanted was for the entire men's room on his floor to be his, and which would require all of the other male employees to either go up a floor or down a floor to use the restroom. That got denied because it wasn't reasonable. Because if it causes a hardship on someone else, like having to go to the restroom on another floor, or having to do part of someone else's work as well as their own, those are not considered as reasonable, and the employer does not have to provide it. Because when a doctor writes out the paperwork for accommodations, it's not like the doctor is writing a prescription that the employer is required to fill. Because the getting accommodations, it is considered a negotiation process, and so that means that the employer and the employee work together on figuring out what things are going to be put in place for someone to be able to do their job. Now, let me ask you this. This is not anywhere on my PowerPoint, but should someone with a disability write on their application that they have a disability when they're applying for a job? Right. The answer is no. Because unless someone is requesting accommodations, they do not have to reveal their diagnosis. The only time that someone would reveal that prior to like a job interview is, say, if they need an American Sign Language interpreter or something like that. Okay. An employer is not allowed to ask you about your diagnosis unless that diagnosis is visible, and and they can only ask whether or not their your diagnosis would have a negative impact on the job. And because otherwise it's no one's business what your diagnosis is. Now, I will tell you that there are a number of the job search websites that like Indeed will ask about that, about whether or not someone has a disability or not. And the way that they get away with that is, number one, they're not the employer, and number two, they're not run out of the United States because it's the Americans with Disabilities Act. It's not it's not the Canadians with Disabilities Act and so forth. And so there have been some questions. I was told about just on Friday about someone who was going through an interview with a company, and they were asking not only about disabilities but also about medications. They can't do that, and so it's okay to say, during those interviews, respectfully, I'm not going to answer those questions because I have, but there are laws that allow for people to have privacy, and employers are not allowed to ask questions like these. Okay, so question: what is an employee's option if the boss or HR tell other employees about their accommodations or the reason for it? That's a great question, Rebecca. And that is, if it's their boss, tell other people, then that person, the boss, needs to be reported to HR in writing. Okay, a lot of employers do have an employee grievance process, and so afford yourself of that, and everything that you put in writing, make sure that you keep a copy for yourself. And if you do something on your work email, print it out and also email it over to your private email account. Okay, because all of the emails that come through your employer's email account are the property of your employer. Now, if it's HR that does this, see whether or not if it is someone low level of HR and they have someone who's higher. And if it is someone who's higher, have them have the employee go ahead and contact my agency. And because myself and our attorneys have had to have some very frank conversations with employers about confidentiality. And if it doesn't, and if it continues on, then we can see whether or not my office can do further, or if we would recommend that the employee get in contact with the Kentucky Commission on Human Rights. Because not only does the commission work with the Federal Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, they also work to help enforce the Kentucky Civil Rights Act.
Now, I did want to say that I have put the link to the contact form for P&A in the chat box.
Thank you.
And just so everyone knows, all these things that have been added to the chat box will also be included in your follow-up email.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Thank you. And also just wanted to say that if you fill out a form or contact our agency, you wouldn't ask for me directly, because I'm one of 24, and I'm not always in the office. So this way, if you just fill out the form or provide the information over the phone to someone, your call will be assigned to someone who will be in the office and be able to respond to you within 3 business days. Okay. And also when it comes to P&A, if someone's situation does not meet like cover what we have authority over or things like that, we don't say, hey, sorry about your luck, and send you on your way. We at least try to steer you in the right direction, because unfortunately, as much as we want to, there is no way that we can represent every person who contacts our office. Okay, and this is the final question. Esther works in a factory. The people she works with make fun of the way she walks and talks. When she told her boss told her to quit being a baby. Should Esther's mom talk with the boss? Yes or no? Okay. Yes, and the answer is no. Because Esther is the employee, she's the one in charge. She can have mom be with her when she speaks with the factory human resources person, not the boss, because the boss is part of the problem, but Esther needs to do the talking. And this goes for those people who have who have legal guardians too. Okay, the employer is not obligated to talk to the legal guardian. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, but they're not obligated to, because guardianship does not cover employment, because employment is not a service. Okay, and Rebecca says, I think Esther's mom should talk with Human Relations Commission or an attorney if there's a persistent pattern of verbal abuse. I agree with that, Rebecca, to a degree. I think Esther needs to do it. She and mom can do it together. Okay. Now, and if Esther is unsure what to say to the human resources person, she can call my office and for help on this. And because a lot of times we have seen well-meaning family members, parents, friends, whomever, go to someone's boss about an issue, and it just makes the situation worse. So that there should be appropriate steps to go through. And also, if stuff like this starts to happen, Esther and her mom should document what happens on what day, who did what, and so forth. Because if you do it when it's happening, you don't have to go back and reinvent the wheel. And if it has to go to the Human Rights Commission or the EEOC or whomever, it is that way you have that documentation proving stuff. Okay, and I have gone over my time, and I am so sorry.
It's been absolutely great. Like, I could talk about these things all day long.
Thank you. Visit www.kyspin.com.